Welcome to AHRC TV's weekly roundup. I'm Josephina Bergston. This week's special program features a panel discussion to mark the International Day of the Victims of Enforced Disappearances, which falls on Sunday, August 30th. The United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said the following about the practice of enforced disappearance. On this solemn day, I reiterate in the strongest possible terms that under international law, no one should be kept in secret detention. Enforced disappearance is a practice that cannot be tolerated in the 21st century. The UN further states that enforced disappearance has frequently been used as a strategy to spread terror within the society. The feeling of insecurity generated by this practice is not limited to the close relatives of the disappeared, but also affects their communities and society as a whole. Enforced disappearance has become a global problem and is not restricted to specific regions of the world. Once largely the product of military dictatorships, enforced disappearance can nowadays be perpetrated in complex situations of internal conflict, especially as a means of political repression of opponents. In today's panel discussion, AHRC TV has gathered participants from 3 Asian countries, Bangladesh, Pakistan and India, to share their views on the problem of enforced disappearances in their countries. The discussion will be moderated by AHRC's editor, Karan Singh. Over to them.
30th August, Sunday, is the International Day of the Victims of Enforced Disappearances. To mark the event, we're having a panel discussion today, and I'll introduce our panelists. To my right is Basir Naveed.
Thank you.
Who's Pakistan Desk Officer at AHRC. We have Bijo Francis, who's the Executive Director and also India in charge at AHRC. And we have Mohammad Ashrafuzaman, who is our Bangladesh Desk Officer at the Asian Human Rights Commission. So we'll directly begin the discussion, and I'd like to begin by inviting Mr. Bijo Francis to discuss the uniqueness or the place of this human rights violation, this particular human rights violation, which is enforced disappearances.
Disappearances as such portrays one of the goriest form of human rights abuses that is reported widely. Unfortunately, in the Asian context, we do not have much of a headway that we have been able to make in terms of investigation or even prosecuting a person, successful prosecution of persons who have been knowingly engaged in undertaking disappearances for and on behalf of the state. Almost in all countries, disappearances have been reported. It continues to be reported from many countries in Asia: Sri Lanka, Nepal, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Cambodia, China. So it has established a widespread presence in Asia for a long period of time. In some countries, like say for example in Sri Lanka, where there have been some extent of an investigation regarding disappearances, it has not resulted in actual prosecution of anyone. And Sri Lanka is not an exception as well. In various other places where there have been some form of investigation. In India, there have been a few investigations into disappearances that happened during the Punjab crackdown, or in Kashmir, or ongoing disappearances that is happening in the northeast of India. In Pakistan, my colleague Basir will be much more able to speak on that. We have not seen much of a prosecution happening on this issue. So this is a burning issue in the region. It is reported but not acted upon much by any of the states. Besides all this, one of the challenges, like many other human rights abuses in the region, is disappearances is also a state policy. It is through this gory act that the state has repeatedly, in different jurisdictions, enforced its absolute fear upon the population. It has provided all kind of immunity to the agents of the state which is engaged in this act. So it is a big issue of which we as human rights organizations, as civil society activists, we were able to just scratch the surface.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. Mr. Zaman, picking up on that aspect of fear that was mentioned. Could you give us a sense of the social ramifications of this crime when there is no closure?
Enforced disappearance is actually creating a huge damage. It's causing damage to the social aspect, particularly in Bangladesh. Like most of the disappearance victims are young people. Their age is about 20 to 40 years, majority of them. And these people leave behind their wife, who are also young in their 20s or early 30s, and children, 1 or 2 or more. So the problem becomes with the wives that and the children. They don't know that whether the husband is still alive or dead. So she cannot decide about her future. There are social and religious obligations and restrictions about that. A dead man and a divorced woman can get remarried to someone else, but in this case they have to wait endlessly, and the society doesn't take the responsibility of those women. At the same time, the state also doesn't care about that. In the case of children, they also don't know that whether their fathers are coming back, and we have cases where children have been found waiting right in front of the house or opening the front door of the house, that the dad will come back.
Mr. Naveed, I turn to you now. Could you give us a sense of how something like enforced disappearances begins in a jurisdiction? Take the example of Pakistan, where now it's a democracy, so-called democracy, where enforced disappearances are found quite prevalent. How did it begin in Pakistan?
Actually, now it has become an endemic political phenomena in the Pakistan, that it is easy. It was in the history of Pakistan, the disappearances or enforced disappearances were very rare. Some political, particularly communist leaders were disappeared. But after this, the war, the Afghanistan, fall of Afghanistan or 9/11 after that, then it has been introduced in the Pakistan. And Musharraf, General Musharraf was the military dictator and military regime started. So it has found very easy to disappear the person and get the result whatever they want. They just torture them and kill them inside the illegal detention centers. And we have also have very good statistics that 57 torture cells are only run by the Pakistan Army, besides the other Pakistan Navy, Pakistan Air Force and all these. So this has become.
There was another statistic that about 6,000 detainees are interned under the military control.
Yes,
right?
that because of the Supreme Court now that Chief Justice is no more, so the Supreme Court has stopped taking the cases of disappearances. That Chief Justice Chaudhary was the man who was taking. So in those days, then Attorney General of Legal Department of the Army, he told to the court that we have 6,000 persons, and he has just his interview came into the Dawn, where he explains that 6,000 persons were disappeared and kept in the internment houses, internment of the military. So you can imagine that, and you cannot say that where is your person and where is the court. Whenever there is a proceeding, they come and say, oh, okay, we don't kept them. Now that Supreme Court have started investigation, then they found, and people have come out. Now it is no more coming out. So this phenomena, now after that, when these so-called civilian governments have come, so military found it very easy to suppress the civilian regime, and even it has suppressed the parliament. They have taken the power from the parliament through the Pakistan Protection Act, that they can keep for 90 days. For example, if one person is
keep what for 90 days?
a prisoner, suspect. Now a suspect is lying since 2 or 3 years in their internment houses or illegal detention center. Now, after that passage of PPA, now they can keep for more 90 days, and they can ask the government court after 90 days that we want more investigation, so we want to keep him.
That's the Pakistan Protection Act.
Yes, that is the, and also then military courts have jurisdiction to keep the people for long time. So, this how this happened? Because of the amendment in the constitution. 2 amendments were made, giving the power to the military. Now, what is the, then how can one expect that the rule of law will prevail?
So would you say in a sense the amendments and the legal provisions have created fertile conditions for increased disappearances?
Yes, and this is a revival of disappearances, enforced disappearances. And Pakistan has ratified the ICCPR, the Civil and Political Rights, in 2010, but is still not ratified the enforced disappearances that mandate. And well, in 2012, a team from the working group of enforced disappearances came to Pakistan, submitted report asking to ratify. Government said but we will do, but the military does not allow. The same thing with the torture cat, that military says no, we will not allow.
So the situation is quite dire in Pakistan.
Yes.
Mr. Francis, I'll bring you in now. Give us a sense of across Asia, what are the systems institutionally where a victim or victim's family in this case can approach the courts or approach the system to obtain redress or relief?
See, at the end of the day, disappearance negates fundamentally the state's responsibility to account for each and every individual which is supposed to be under its protection. So, viewed from that point or from that idea or concept, disappearance also speaks to the appalling, to the rudimentary, to the archaic nature of the justice institutions that we have in the region. Well, there is a school of thought which says that you can't compare, apples and oranges together, but they are all fruits. But it is common law system, civil law system, systems which are just evolving and so on. But I think disappearance is an issue which transgresses all of these boundaries, this legal theory boundaries or the practice theory boundaries, where it boils down to one single point where the state is to be made accountable for each and every individual which is under its custody. Now, look at any average case at random. If you look at any of these cases involving disappearances, what is that we see? A person or a family looking for their beloved, whom they do not know where the person is, whether he or she is in custody for any charge against this person, produced before any court, which place in the country the person is, which camp, like Basir was saying that the Pakistan government has acknowledged the presence of 6,000 people, which camps, which how do I contact this person, can I arrange legal assistance for the person, and then the journey begins of the relatives or the dear persons for whom that disappeared person at the end of the day matters, to the court. Court will direct the police will say we don't know, and then you will go back to the government and then to the minister and then to the press and then back again to the court. So it's a ping pong game that the state institutions play upon the individual, keeping that individual's identity secret, or must have just killed. I mean, the person would have just been killed, which is often the case in many of these cases of disappearances which has been documented. At the end of the day, you get to know that the person is either killed, of which there is no evidence, of which there is no grave, and so on and so forth, or the institutions of justice which we attribute the term justice to are simply incapable of dealing with the state's responsibility or asking the state to discharge its responsibility. There are so many jurisdictions like that. The writ of habeas corpus, for example, is a concept that exists in legal theory and in practice. There are a large number of countries where this writ doesn't apply: Cambodia, Burma, China, Nepal. These are all, in Nepal there has been a little bit of progress, but still the writ to be enforced, the right, the authority of the court as an independent agency to ask the state to account for a missing person just does not even exist in the legal consideration, in the legal knowledge of many of these jurisdictions. In countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, where the writ has been established, you get the court to issue an order, but then the military or the agency that is accused of having engaged in the disappearance would say that we are immune to your power. So, ultimately it boils down to the point of the state's accountability of the actions that the state agencies take. And unfortunately, in all these jurisdictions that at least on this table represented, and many other jurisdictions like Nepal, Cambodia, Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, China, all these jurisdictions, there isn't a sensible, working, pragmatic legal procedure and arrangements through which you can actually deal with this issue. So, as my colleague was saying, ratifying a convention against disappearances is a big step forward. But then to breathe life into the promise of the state's responsibility to account for each and every individual, we can't go ahead with this kind of institutional setups that we have. So, if we were to deal with disappearances, if we were to deal with torture, we are in essence, in quintessence, speaking about a radical restructuring in the approach, in the understanding of the institutions and the manner in this with which these institutions are supposed to function, which unfortunately is still not, even for the civil society, it is still not an arithmetics which has been fully understood and appreciated. So, every year you have a day in which disappearances is observed internationally. We in Asia, like our colleagues in Asia and the rest of the world, also mark the day, but then that day goes. Disappearances continues. To deal with the question of disappearance, to deal with the question of torture, to deal with the state excesses, one need to have institutions that are independent and are actually empowered and are actually intended to deal with the excess use of state authority or the abuse of power of the state authority, for which we will have to reconsider, are these institutions really geared to do that. So, at the end of the day, we are talking about dealing with a restructuring, re-engineering of the justice institutions in our countries. This is not just for India, it applies across the border, across the board. So, if we were to deal with the question as serious as disappearance, as serious as torture, we will also have to, on the same side, on the same coin, on the other flip side of the coin, we will also have to deal with institutional restructuring.
There's another example recently from Bangladesh of a cross-border aspect of the disappearances. Could you tell us the case of Mr. Salahuddin Ahmed?
Salahuddin Ahmed, yes. He was a former bureaucrat, and then he joined politics. He became a state minister in Bangladesh. He was with that portfolio for 5 years. And at the time of his abduction, he was performing as the spokesperson of the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, which is the main opposition at the moment. So, according to investigative reports published in the media, that shows a rapid action battalion picked up this man from a house in Dhaka, capital city. And before arresting them, the same agency arrested his personal drivers, his personal cooks, and also the other personal staffs who helps him in his daily life. So, several of those people were arrested, detained, and many other places where the law enforcement agencies suspected this man might be hiding. The Rapid Action Battalion raided those places, including private bank, and at the end he was picked up on 10th March this year, and for 62 days he remained disappeared. After that, he has been surfaced in Shillong playground polo ground in India. So
In India, that is.
in India,
Across the border.
across the border, and the border is, according to my knowledge, it's more than 30 kilometers away. The place, the polo ground. So in such circumstance, according to the evidence, and being those 6-7 people of his personal staffs still detained in prison in fabricated cases, this is very clear. The state is behind the abduction of Salahuddin Ahmed.
That's a very interesting example, Mr. Zaman. Staying with you, could you tell us a bit more about the institutions in Bangladesh? Mr. Francis referred to the writ of habeas corpus. Suppose some of the families of the disappeared does have the courage to go and approach the courts. What do they usually encounter?
Since 2009 and till July 2015, there are 209 individual human beings have been disappeared, and in all these cases the relatives or the eyewitnesses, they confirm, our human rights defenders, that people either wearing the uniforms of the law enforcement agencies or plainclothes persons coming by the vehicles of used by law enforcement agencies, the official vehicles, they picked up these people. So out of these 209 people, about a dozen, they dared and they could afford the, the expenditure is very high for going for habeas corpus petitions. And in last 6-7 years, not a single case which has been filed before the High Court division in Bangladesh has been disposed successfully.
What is clear is that until what Mr. Francis said, that until the institutions are re-engineered, we're going to keep getting cases like this. So in the end, to end the panel discussion, I'd like to turn to Mr. Naveed. If this is the situation of the institutions and there's no place to obtain redress, yet for obtaining justice, people still speak. But if they speak in Pakistan, what are the ramifications of talking about disappearances? Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, we have the case of this Baloch missing persons, that organization to which we have helped to form that organization, not by money, but with that. And that organization has become very strong one, and it has documented the cases of more than 8,000 disappeared Balochis. But they cannot document that, as they claim that 18,000 persons are missing. So they started long march, and then after that long march, wherever they were going, so civil society people, particularly students from universities and different educational institutions, joined. So they all have been stopped by or beaten by the police. And when after that, when there was a discussion at the Lahore University, so some professors, 2 professors, 3, they have arranged a talk show from the political department. So the ISI, the Intelligence Services of Pakistan, notorious agency, that has written the letter to the Chancellor, Registrar of the university, to stop that discussion. Otherwise, we will take action, and the university authorities have stopped that one. And another case was that of Sabine Mahmood, a very good lady for working for this against these disappearances. She has managed like a big floor for open discussion. From every walk of life, people can sit there and have coffee and discuss that. So she has arranged a talk show with the leader of the organization of disappeared persons from Balochistan. So before that, she was receiving telephone calls from the intelligence agency that don't do that, otherwise you will face. And her mother also received. The day when she held the discussion, when she was going back to home, she was shot dead. So these are the cases. Now how you can imagine that people will go. For that example, that what is the remedy? Actually, those persons who are disappeared, the family members of those persons, they cannot go for FIR. because police say, okay, some intelligence or the military people have taken, wait for that, and they refuse to enter. Even the police go with the rangers to raid the houses, but they don't file. They don't allow to file the FIR. And when they go to the court, if they are so brave enough and they got that something to go for the court, so then another one is abducted. They very clearly they say that we will abduct your another one. So what you need from us? So this is that, and now from 3 or 4 years in our province of Sindh, that has happened. So many young people are being abducted and killed, and their bodies are lying on the streets. So this is how people will go for that court process. That is very difficult thing, and courts are saying to bring the person. They said they don't have this.
Right. So there you have it. In summary, you have a snapshot of the status of disappearances in various South Asian nations. In Sri Lanka now, the white van abductions, the investigations of some of the cases are coming up again for what was a notorious way of disappearing. In Nepal, the commission has been set up. It hasn't started operating for all the disappearances that happened during the civil war. But that's just South Asia. I mean, across Asia, disappearances continue. And from what Mr. Francis said, if I can use that as a way to summarize, until there's a radical re-engineering of the institutions themselves, along with a consciousness, we may not be able to address this human rights violation. Thank you. That's all from this panel discussion. Thank you.
That is all for this weekly roundup. For more on these and other issues, please visit www.humanrights.asia. Thank you for watching, and see you next week.